Next speaker we have here is James Reinders from Intel. The title for the talk is The Intersection of Staying Secure with Full Speed Ahead. James is going to do this virtually. James Reinders is an engineer at Intel with parallel computing experience spanning 4 decades, focused on enabling parallel programming in a heterogeneous world. James is currently focused on DPC++ project, SYCL for LLVM, and the oneAPI initiative, delivering APIs spanning computer devices for many types from many vendors. James is an author and co-author and editor of 12 technical books related to parallel programming. His latest book is about SYCL, which could be freely downloadable. He has had the great fortune to help make key contribution to several of world's fastest computer, #1 on top 500 list, as well as many other supercomputers and software developer tools. James consistently enjoy writing, teaching, programming, and consulting in areas related to parallel computing, HPC, and AI. It is my pleasure and distinct honor to welcome James. And James, if you're there on Zoom, you should be able to share your screen. Let me see if you can able to share your screen.
Hopefully you can hear me, and Zoom is telling me that
talk, so I think we have a combination of both awareness and research talk in the symposium. Let's see if we can. James, can you hear us?
Yes, can you hear me is a bigger question. Oh my.
1 minute.
It tells me I am sharing.
There you go.
So Zoom tells me that I am
cannot
sharing.
hear you, but we can see your slide.
Why can you not hear me? That is a mystery.
They're doing something here. Let's see. Hopefully we can able to hear you soon.
Hopefully you can. I'm Zoom. Zoom is telling me I am speaking. I am speaking. I think there must be some issue that I'm not in control of. I ran the microphone check with Zoom, and it plays back just fine for me inside Zoom. It'll be a really short talk if we don't figure out how to get my voice transmitted.
Looks like we have some technical difficulties. Let's see if we can figure this out quick.
Yeah, I guess I'll keep talking until you tell me that you can hear me. I run the different.
There are also, while they're figuring out this, there are other things going on. And during the lunch break sessions, you will see some interesting cybersecurity quiz, which you can participate via your phone. There is a $300 giveaway prize as part of the during the lunch break.
Yeah,
so
my
keep an eye on
microphone
that
volume
thing
is
when
doing
we
great.
do that. And not sure what's going on, James. And I think this, let's see.
So Zoom on my end tells me all is good. Other than an obvious echo.
Yeah, that is good. I think
that means that someone in your room has their mic open, like the person at the podium, and is picking me up and feeding it back. So
I think we are okay.
I think we are okay. I think we are okay. I think we are okay. I think we are okay. I think we are okay. I think we are okay. I think we are okay.
I'm guessing if I'm the only one speaking, we'll be fine. But if you're going to speak from the podium, you have to make sure that your mic can't pick up my voice.
Okay, I'm gonna get out of here. You go ahead.
All right. Well, I am monitoring chat. If you need to tell me something, the organizers, feel free to shoot me a note in chat. I'll try to pay attention. It's a little hard when you're talking. Well, good morning. My name is James Reinders. You know, how do I describe myself? Well, it was a nice introduction. I've worked on some of the world's most powerful computers, which is a humbling experience. I get to work with a lot of people. You know, when I first started with computers as a hobbyist more than a few decades ago, computers weren't connected. There was no internet. There was no email. The attack surface was a lot smaller. So I was going to take a little different take today and talk a little bit about side channel attacks, something that I've been exposed to multiple times and had to have the humbling experience of knowing that I was a key part of designing some capabilities that became industry standard that then became weaknesses in the computers decades later when assumptions we made that were completely valid when we did them became invalid. So I'll talk a little about that because I believe that talking as an engineer about failures you've been involved with, if you want to call them failures, or let's say assumptions that shift but aren't compensated for, it's a huge problem. So now I'm you could say that I'm an Iowa farm kid that ended up in Michigan. And now I've lived for 30 plus years in Portland, Oregon, where basically I traded my childhood snow for rain. And the good news about that is you don't have to shovel rain every morning to get your car out of the driveway. But, you know, being around Detroit, lots and lots of folks loved hyping up their cars. And I never really got into that, getting the car in the garage and, you know, trying to get 6 more horsepower out of it. But that's exactly what I was always doing with any computer I could pry the lid off of. So I've been involved in working to make computers fast. And, you know, it's an interesting interplay as time goes on that the things you do to make sure your computer is unencumbered in order to solve some of the biggest science and engineering problems in the world, you know, is at odds sometimes with the optimal security, or at least it becomes a challenge, especially when these machines are shared. So the first talk is very interesting because you talk about all this attack surface we create with our accounts and such. You know, that it's humbling or it's worrisome to think about the attack surfaces we can create by merely creating a computer. One of the supercomputers I worked on was down in Sandia. I was an architect on the first teraflop machine in the world, which, you know, teraflops at that time, we could build this huge machine and, you know, it consumed like 850 kilowatts to turn it on, and now we can do a teraflop in about 30 watts on these really big machines. So times have changed. But one of the things I was exposed to really early on is that the government and some of its agencies, you know, such as No Such Agency, when they ran their workloads, they physically separated the machine, even though it was in a secure facility, you know, hopefully, you know, there was at the time, no outside internet access or very limited. The machine was almost always separated into 2 parts, except for when we were first installing it. And half of it could run secure workloads and the other half didn't. The other half could have researchers in on it, and, you know, many more people could run on that half of the machine. And that's because the government was extremely paranoid that something might get left behind. Now, of course, we were all confident that we did everything that nothing could leak. But and this is still typical today, that some of the most secure computers in the world simply they work very hard to make sure that they don't get exposed to anything, or they never even have an unsecure workload on them, and a very limited number of people have access. But that's not the world I usually live in, or any of us live in. We want to share our machines, we want to connect them, we want to make them convenient. So I'm a big fan of Sherlock Holmes, and so I can't help but keep going back to Sherlock Holmes when I think about some of the attacks I've been involved in looking at and scratching our heads and saying, how can we avoid having these attacks ever again in the future? Because, you read a Sherlock Holmes novel and, he just casually sits there and says, oh yeah, this and this happened. And he gets asked, how did you know that? And he says, well, there's this, mud on the bottom of the cane and things like that. It's similar to the detective work we saw in the last talk, the oh my gosh, I saw a sign of a business behind you. I saw a street sign, I did this. It's just these little clues. They get a lot more esoteric to understand when you get deep down in a machine. Well, maybe I shouldn't say more esoteric, they're different. When you get deep down in a machine and you think, wow, I'm going to allow two workloads to run, like two apps on the phone, and one of them is going to steal secrets from the other, even though the original one never leaks any actual data. And when I was preparing for this talk, it was sort of amusing to me to think about, because early on I used a PDP-8, which was a DEC machine that you used a front panel to boot up. Anyways, very, very long time ago, very limited machine. But I wondered, do people remember that you could take an AM radio up to it and hear static interference from it? I hadn't thought about this in a long, long time. And it turns out of course, there's websites dedicated to this. And basically, the PDP-8 emitted different electromagnetic emissions based on the workloads it was running. And so the user groups at the time, in the DEC user group, multiple people took it upon themselves to write music compilers. And basically, you typed in, and you did this usually on a teletype. Sometimes some people had CRTs. But you typed in a song, the notes, and then it would turn that into which subroutines to call for how much duration. And the PDP-8 then would emit electromagnetic radiation. And if you held an AM radio, like in this video close to it, you would hear songs. These were amazingly good at reproducing music, given the technology. It never dawned on me that this is a leak of information. Now, it turns out that was lack of imagination on my part. Going back into the 60s, there are multiple things that made it very obvious that some people realized, hey, if you're within 100 feet of a computer, you can judge its workload on certain machines. There were even things that could capture CRTs, because CRTs are very electromagnetic. And the question was, it was believed if you were up to a couple hundred feet away from a CRT that you could actually reproduce what was on the CRT if you had sophisticated enough equipment. So it's kind of scaring me looking back at that and going, oh my gosh. But let me talk about a couple of examples that are very personal to me, and hopefully give a little color commentary about why I think they came to be, and things that I scratch my head about every day, and so many of my colleagues around the world at many different companies. How do we make sure we don't make mistakes like this? We're not going to make this mistake again. At least that's my intent. But the harder part is figuring out what breadcrumbs we're leaving laying around that a very committed, say, security researcher, or maybe someone, their motives may be for a nation state or something, so their research may not be used for good, but we don't want to leave around those breadcrumbs. The first one I got exposed to was actually an open SSL, but this is kind of a well-known exploit these days. But the the personal notes for me, well, first of all, what the exploit was it was realized that the way people wrote their algorithms, with a public key and a private key, that, you want your decode to be really fast. And so when you get something that's encrypted, you as a user want to decode it and see it. And it turns out that if you can accurately time something, you could find out how long it was taking for your decode algorithm to work. Well, that doesn't sound too scary until you realize that the amount of time to decode varied based on how many zeros were in the hidden key versus ones. And so you invested a lot in having a very long security key, a long RSA key, because the longer your key is, the harder it is to guess. And we keep making keys longer to keep ahead of the fastest computer technologies that are out there. We want the keys to be stronger than what is reasonable that anyone could crack in a reasonable amount of time. Well, imagine if you discover a way to suddenly reduce that search space. Instead of it being a 256-bit key where every bit can be a 1 or a 0, you figure out how many ones and zeros there are. Effectively reduce the keys as if it was, an 11-bit key. And then you can just go crack it on probably crack it on a program you wrote on your cell phone. This was a tough one, and it came out. And of course, the fix to this one is to go back to the algorithm and change its behavior so that observing how long the program, the algorithm takes to run won't give you a reliable source of this. So there's a combination of evening it out, so the ones and zeros take the same amount of time, and then even maybe injecting some noise so that the data that you get back, if you're observing the timing, is even is useless. I got involved in this in a personal way because, in our quest to make computers run faster and faster, we started making them multi-core. Rather than there just being one processor core, oh my gosh, we had two. Of course, you look back at the good old days when there were only two. Now, there are easily dozens of them, the very powerful cores, or in some accelerators, we're talking about hundreds or thousands of cores. And big machines I work on have hooked them together and have millions of cores. But of course, the cores that are closer to each other can time each other better. So someone wrote a nice little algorithm that demonstrated when they had a multi-core, they could do this. Part of my job was to scratch my head and go, well, okay, cute. You can do that with multi-core, but you actually could have done this for the past decade without a multi-core. You just needed to figure out how you were going to get accurate enough timings. So I actually helped Intel with a response, helping clarify that multi-core hadn't brought this problem about. The attack was actually valid well before multi-core. It's just someone found out an easy way to write an algorithm with multi-core. So an assumption shifted. I mean, the thought of one application sitting on a computer and timing another application accurately would have been laughable 20 years before this, and yet it changed. But another one I got involved with, this is 2017, and this was Meltdown Inspector. And it hit the news in 2017, in late 2017. It turns out it had been known by some security researchers and major companies for a while they ran around trying to patch for it, in fact, very effectively, so that these patches were out before the information got made public. Now, if you want to be a conspiracy theorist, we have no way of knowing if any nation states or people who knew how to keep their mouths shut knew about this for a long time before it and were using it. We just don't have no way of knowing. There's never been anything revealed that said, oh, someone did know this attack. But this one really is a toughie. And I can tell you about why we didn't see it coming. And by we, I'm not speaking for Intel. I'm talking about computer architects that designed these. at one point in time, a microprocessor was very simple. It went out and fetched an instruction from memory. It decoded it, figured out what data it needed, and then went and fetched the data. And once that was brought in, then it executed the instruction, and then it wrote out its results. And then it went back and fetched another instruction. That's fundamentally what computers still do today, except we put a lot of energy into making things happen in parallel. How many instructions can you bring in at once, decode them, make sure that you cause the result to be the same, but try, could we fetch 3 instructions at a time and do the different operations of them at the same time? And, my microprocessor, my GPU design, whatever compute device I have, has all these different things it can do. It can do a floating point multiply and a floating point multiply and an add, a memory read and write. It could do them all at the same time. So if we pull in enough instructions, well, we had a model in our heads even from mainframes in the 80s, but I was involved in microprocessors. The earliest ones were mid to late 90s, started saying, oh, we started having this model in our head. There's an architectural state. So, and to me, that means if you stop a program and write out all what it's doing to disk, and then you later want to load that up and start running it again, what would be all the things you need to save? Well, certainly all of those should be kept secret. And so the mistake in that was there's lots of footprints left laying around, if you will. There's things like when your program runs, the caches get read and written and data gets left behind in them. Well, we were very careful that the data never leaked, but caches behave differently based on what has been read and written in them. So it turns out if one application has stuff neatly in cache and is running at full speed because it can get its data out of cache, if another application is running and causes some of that cache lines to be kicked out because it has data that overlaps, everything happens in the machine okay, but the first program gets slowed down a little bit on certain accesses, which is evidence that another program on the machine kicked its data out. Oh my gosh, that becomes a hint, a very worthy of Sherlock Holmes. And so there were a couple of different things, and it's really esoteric why Meltdown and Spectre were looked at as different. One of them deduced secrets based on the machine changing that sort of behavior due to what we call out of order execution. And the other one was about speculative execution. And these are both well-known techniques to make a computer run faster, but they, if you're patient enough, they leave kind of a footprint behind. So one of the attacks, and just give you a quick example, one of the attacks, let's say we wanted to find out the contents of some memory that the operating system was keeping very secret from us. Maybe it's got an RSA key in it. And we know where the location is, and we wish we knew what the data was. Well, we can't read that data. Unless somebody's done a horrible job designing the computer, you'll never be able to read the data from your application. But what if you could fill the caches up with your data? And what if you could trick the computer sort of by using speculative execution? I should explain. Speculative execution is when you deeply pipeline these machines and you want to be doing as many instructions at a time, the worst thing that can happen is you hit a branch, because you're executing all this great code and suddenly you want to go execute from somewhere else. The branch can go 2 places and it can fall through or it can go somewhere. The question is if you're pipelining all these instructions, where do you get the next instructions from? So any computer design does prediction, and it speculatively executes, but you have to be careful. You're executing instructions you're not sure the program ever would. So you have to make sure they don't fault or actually give you data that you're not supposed to see and all of that. Well, someone figured out if they loaded up the caches, got them nice and smooth, full speed, and then had a speculative execution that confused, that wasn't predicted correctly by the microprocessor, that the microprocessor would actually go execute those instructions, which might evict something in and out of cache. It might pull something in cache, it might evict something. And then it turns out the microprocessor says, oh, never mind, that wasn't a branch that was taken, but it left behind this footprint. And then what you do is you go back and access the data you thought was in cache very carefully, time it, and you can figure out whether something was evicted. Well, they write these massive loops for this attack, and it takes hundreds of thousands, if not millions of cycles to extract one byte out of memory, and then rinse and repeat. Anyways, it was a very humbling to me when these came to light. At first, some companies, marketing people who weren't as knowledgeable or PR people said, oh, our processor doesn't have this problem. Any of us that worked really deeply on this, as soon as we saw these attacks, realized, oh, crap, everyone has this problem. Every advanced processor, it doesn't matter which manufacturer, it escaped all of us because it didn't matter. The information, the fact that the caches came and went never occurred to us. We were trying to get speed, and we certainly were not guilty of leaking data directly. We knew how to avoid that. The problem was we were leaving footprints behind that Sherlock Holmes could come by and use to infer information they're not supposed to have. And that's a full security breach. This isn't a casual thing. This is something we have to make sure can't happen. And there's been so much energy put into this sort of thing. So anyways, just to leave, a thought that what the soul searching I've gone through and other people who are involved in these designs that obviously left behind the ability, unless they were mitigated, which we did tons of things to make these attacks not valid anymore. The idea of separation can go away. You've got multiplexed communications. You're sharing the same memory. I mean, we're not going to build computers that run one. Put it in phone terms. You're not going to have a phone that runs one app and another phone for another app and another. You want to share those things for efficiency, for convenience. Anytime you allow two tenant programs, you've got a danger that one will observe what the other is doing. And then you don't need to be taking advantage of any known exploits or such. If you can start to observe what another program's doing, that could be bad. So shared state is evil, but necessary. And of course, with speculative execution and out of order, when we first implemented it in the 90s, the program I talked about, like Spectre or Meltdown, they conceivably would have, to get one byte out of memory might have taken a day of computation. And plus these were running on PCs and that weren't connected. Nobody cared, having one application snoop on the other, what were you going to do? But these changed over time. And it's a really incredibly valuable thing to think about when you're engineering or involved in the engineering of a system is, even though the cost to exploit something might be way too high today, can you make sure that the people who keep using that innovative design year after year after year realize that you had an assumption that the data, that you didn't have to take any steps to prevent this type of exploit from being used? I mean, the first microprocessors that did out of order execution or speculative execution ran at the 100 megahertz level. And by the time these exploits were happening, we're talking about microprocessors running at the 3 or a little over 3 gigahertz. It changed everything. And the value, these were running in servers, not on little PCs in someone's home. So it was the value of the secrets went up. So anyways, I'll just leave it. I think if you're doing security, side channel, the term side channel should be something you've heard of or you worry about. It's really interesting at the most fundamental level in a computer's design that we now have to worry about, and have had to worry about over the past decade now, emerging side channels, and OpenSSL, or the SSL type attacks, and the Spectre and Meltdown, I think, really helped people who are designing computers think about it. And I don't want to go in deep detail, but with the emergence of more and more accelerators and so forth, it's very hard to keep up and be confident as people push them to the limit and make them multi-tenant, meaning multiple applications running on it, that we're always thinking through all the things, side channels, the power consumption. I mentioned electromagnetic radiation at the beginning, putting an AM radio next to PDP-8s. Back in the 70s, there's even sounds, the sounds computers make can give you information. If you imagine if your phone beeps every time you get close to breaking into something, if someone made that goof, then you'd start attacking it and paying attention to what causes beeps to go off. So I know I need to wrap up here, so I'll leave a few just random thoughts as I puzzle about this and worry about how do I keep helping Intel and others deliver fast systems, and that by its very nature means that there's lots of attack surface. What do we have to worry about going forward? The two most obvious things that are staring us in the face is quantum computing and AI, whether it's large language models or some form of deep learning or neuromorphic computing or whatever. It doesn't matter to me much. These are two very distinctly different things. Quantum computing has a phenomenal ability to solve certain types of physical world problems, optimization problems, at a speed much faster. It can't solve a lot of things any faster than today's computers, in fact, much worse at them. But this class of applications that they can make faster is incredibly important. And if and when quantum computing actually can get to scale, it represents a big danger. I had a funny discussion with some crypto encryption experts about quantum, a long time ago. And I said, oh, banks must be real worried about it. And they said, nope, not at all. And I said, you've got to be kidding me. And they said, oh, no, it's transactions and stuff between ATMs and so on. They're not worried about quantum because it's when these machines become real, they'll be upgrading their networks. They're constantly, but they don't have to solve the whole problem today. I said, oh, so who's worried about it? The people that are worried about it are the people who have secrets today that they don't want decrypted anytime in the next, 50 years, 100 years, 200 years, and yet they're encrypting them. And the question is, can someone get their hands on that when it's still supposed to be a secret in 50 years and decrypt it? That's a challenge. And it's a challenge we face with our computer designs too, is we wouldn't want a workload to be able to be run on a computer that's older as a vulnerability. AI is just going to get more scrutiny. In the first talk, I was fascinated, all the different Sherlock Holmesy types things. If you can't spend all the time looking up all these things, you could program an AI device to do it for you. Okay, really random things, just because this is a fun conference and take away things. One thing that I read about a while back was there was this security researcher named Chris Roberts that claimed that he was getting on United flights and prying apart the entertainment center on his seat and using it to get to the engine controls. And that he had done this on multiple flights and proven that he could hack in and change this would be horrible. The FBI, of course, in an abundance of caution, issued warrants and arrested him. He's been banned for life from United and so on. And then lots of reports came out, this isn't even possible. I don't know what to think. This is real important. I know nothing, but it really gives you pause for thought. It's like, I'm sitting on a plane and some computers, some wires in that plane potentially have to do with the engine controls. If they actually routed them through the back of the seat in front of me, I would say they were idiots. But the question really becomes, is there something you could do that no one's thought about? That's a scary one. If you don't know about some of these other things, in World War II, the Allies spent an enormous amount of effort building fake ships. These are made out of not quite foam, but they're to fool the Germans, whose technology was to fly planes over and look at them and figure out, oh my gosh, I think they're invading up here. Today, there are these inflatable tanks. They blow up on the field and throw over the top of a car and drive around. There used to be styrofoam tanks and things, but then they didn't have infrared signatures. It turns out if you put a hot car underneath, they look a lot like a tank. The Ukrainians and the Russians are using these. These are kind of random thoughts. The reason to me, it's intriguing is these are deceptions being purposely injected in a system. And I constantly wonder if computers don't need to have more deceptions injected in them to make it even harder to get after what's really going on. So, you know, what will we do to make things useful and safe and make these qualities last? I don't know. But to me, a really critical question that, you know, we can only spend so much time on, but we need to worry about is what aren't we thinking about today that you'll be able to exploit in 2 years, whether it's quantum computing, AI, or some other technology. What is it that we're not thinking about? Thinking about it today will help us a lot. I've had some very personal experience with some things that were really clever and very safe when we created them, and then nobody ever went back and realized that the world was changing out from under us, and that the type of attacks that we had you know, became possible, you know, decades after we first did these really great innovations that, you know, got PhDs and got patents and all that stuff. And then turns out 20 years later, they became the source of, you know, the ability to be exploited. A lot of energy goes into it these days worrying about this exact question. So I hope that's something that you will do as well, is worry about that. And that's it. I hopefully, you know, inject some thoughts in your head and some conversations to have, and you can be part of helping the future of computing be secure, not just worrying about what can be exploited today, but what decisions are we making today that may make it exploitable in the future.
And now we can
It might be in the chat. 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 Might be in the.
Can somebody type? Can somebody type? Can somebody type? Can somebody type?
Look, let me mention, if you can still hear me, I am on LinkedIn. My email's not hard to find. If any of you want to drop me a note, I'm always eager and happy to correspond with people. I can be horribly slow at responding, especially LinkedIn and so forth. But I do get back to it, and I don't mind if you send me a note and I don't reply, and you send another note and put it back on the top of my queue. I do do my best to follow up with anyone.
We're gonna take a 10. 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 We're gonna take a 10.